Hello, good day. My name is Betsy Corcoran. I'm CEO and co-founder of EdSurge, and we are really excited to have you join us today for what promises to be a very, very interesting webinar. A word about EdSurge. We're a news and information resource covering everything at the confluence of education and the future of learning. And we do programs like this online. We have lots of newsletters, and we invite you to explore our website and take a look at all of the resources that we're offering you. For today's webinar, we have lined up a terrific panel of experts, both in education and technology, to talk about one of the most important topics in online education, which is how do we humanize the online learning experience and really help students succeed. And I'd like to also thank DigitalEd for the support that makes this webinar possible. DigitalEd offers online education solutions that are designed especially for STEM courses, and they're on a mission to really transform online education and empower educators across the world to really improve learning for everyone. So let's get started. Today we're joined by some terrific folks. We have Jim Cooper, who is the founder and CEO of DigitalEd. He's a serial entrepreneur with 25 years of experience in building advanced technology that really supports learning. Under his leadership, DigitalEd was launched in June 2018 as a spin-out of a company called MapleSoft, which builds mathematics-based software for educators, engineers, and researchers. And DigitalEd's mission, as we said, is really focused on online education, and Jim is very focused on really helping meet the needs of STEM educators and researchers and students everywhere. Also online, we have Kim Vincent-Layton, who is an educational developer and a designer at the Center for Teaching and Learning and Communications, a lecturer at the California State University in Humboldt. That's the most northern university as a school in the California state system. Kim has been actively engaged in cultivating relationships and exploring what community engagement means through pedagogy and through technology for her entire career as both an educator and as a designer. Also with us is Mark Schneider, who's an educational technology specialist at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. At Northern Alberta Institute of Tech, Mark is best known for delivering great instruction and for his ongoing commitment to education technology research. He helps lead a campus-wide initiative that's phasing out a legacy LMS, learning management system, and is really building computer-mediated assessments that help both the faculty and the students. And finally, we have Di Xu, who's an assistant professor of education at the University of California at Irvine. Dee does a lot of research on the labor markets and the return that different degrees and programs have for students in higher education. She also conducts research exploring the impact of educational programs, interventions, and instructional practice on student course performance, persistence, and degree completion. So you can see we have a pretty cool house of people to really address this topic. So a couple of thoughts before we really dive into the questions for them. So online learning. You probably know the history, but it's useful to remember that back in 1992, there was a provision in the Higher Education Act of that year that got known as the 50% rule, which basically discouraged educational institutions from offering a significant number of online programs by cutting off federal funding for students when they were in universities or institutions that had more than half their classes or half their students online. All that began changing, first with waivers, and then finally the rule was scrapped in 2006. So fast forward to today, or specifically to 2016, 76% of all degree granting institutions, about 3,500, are now offering online courses. So Dee has been doing quite a bit of research on who's offering what. And this chart may seem a little challenging to see, but it shows the total number of education programs that can be pursued exclusively online at degree granting institutions. You can see that this is extraordinary. There's obviously a lot of variation by state and also by degree. Programs in business, marketing are topping the list, followed by programs in health and education. But the quality of those online courses is not all the same. And what Dee's research and other folks' research has definitely shown is that online courses with a high degree of instructor interaction are more expensive, but they also make a huge difference. And so today's session here is to really talk about what are the strategies for improving and really humanizing these kinds of courses. How do we increase the student-instructor interaction? And how do we create the groundwork for a more humanized experience? So let's jump into some questions. Dee, given the research that you have been doing about the quality of online programs, what have we really learned in the last decade or two as the number of these programs has really exploded? And why are we really talking about humanizing the experience?
Thank you, Betsy. So I would like to start by saying that before talking about the quality of online learning, I would say that the growth of online learning is definitely a promising direction because it addresses a very important problem that is offering education to students while at the same time provide the flexibility to students. So as Betsy has just showed, the online learning is growing really fast in higher education, but it's particularly fast at community college settings that enrolls a large proportion of adult learners, and the for-profit sector that enrolls a large proportion of adult learners. So when I was looking at the chat, that there have been a number of people talking about what's their impression about online learning, and I see that people generally have very positive attitude toward it, right? So I see words like promising, flexibility, so it's really important and also highlights the importance for us to further improve the quality of education. So back to the question about quality of education, I would say, to summarize the current existing studies on college courses, these studies typically find negative effects of online delivery format on student course outcomes. So this is, have already used strategies to compare students who have similar motivations, similar characteristics. So those baseline differences have already been controlled, and based on that, there is still very big gap between face-to-face courses and online courses in terms of student persistence rate and student performance, like grades among those who persisted to the end of the course. And more importantly, it seems that the online performance decrement is particularly large among academically less prepared students and the minority students. So in other words, online course without strong support, like what we are going to talk about today, like potential ways to better support students, humanize the course, without those additional supports, online learning, the expansion of online learning may actually exacerbate educational inequalities that we are already observing in the traditional face-to-face classes.
Right, that's such an important point. We're going to come back to that, I think, in spades. But let's pause there. Mark, I'd love to pull you into this conversation. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing at Northern Alberta College. You have been really working to kind of take a human approach to online learning. But first, paint a portrait for us of what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what the program is, how many students you have, and then some of the experiences that you've had.
So specifically, I'm in charge of teaching our online math courses, which is primarily for the sort of academic upgrading area or high school realm. But my greater responsibility at the institution really is to work with instructors from all areas of our campus, which as a polytechnic might involve trades, might involve medical areas, might involve business, might involve engineering, a lot of different subject areas, and work with the various instructors and subject matter experts in those areas to help develop their online courseware and get more courses online. So that's primarily what I've been doing here at the Institute is working with instructors to bring their courses, if you would, to a higher standard, to make them more effective in the sense of instructional workloads or in the sense of student successes and efficiencies. So
great. And one big lesson learned that you've had in the course of doing that?
So the big lesson I'd say learned is certainly instructors, there's always going to be that need to be very empathetic toward your students, very, as we're talking about, humanistic. And I guess some ways in which the big lesson in doing that is you're not going to be able to set something up and just leave it. It's going to require constant refinement. The course is going to be always evolving. You're going to need to be planning and planning and planning. And you can't just rely on planning in downtime, but you're going to need to be planning while actually conducting and facilitating the course.
More or less than you would if it were a traditional in-person class.
I would say significantly more, absolutely, in the sense that in a face-to-face class, we're given better opportunity to in real time view how our students are reacting to certain materials and how they're reacting to presentation, and we can adjust on the fly as educators. But in an online class, a lot of what we do is asynchronous, so we have to sort of plan ahead and shift things on the fly while the course is happening and adapt to new learners as they come in and enter the course.
Fabulous. We are going to get to the Q&A questions in just a second, but I'd like to bring Jim into this conversation. Jim, you've built some of the tools for this world. Tell us a little bit about how your perspective on building these tools has really evolved, what you have learned over the course of doing this.
Okay. There's three major groups that use these tools. So there are the students who consume, there's authors of the content itself, and then there's the instructors who are actually delivering the material. We've actually found that they're all three are very important, but we feel the most important is the instructor. Especially in the humanizing point of view, the instructor is the human connection to the students. So we're social animals, and that's how we're used to working. So we focus very much on trying to give tools that make the instructor more effective or make his life easier. These are tools that can give a snapshot of where the student is instantly, so like they know where they are. A lot of automatic marking with sophisticated feedback, so that it allows more time by the that the instructor can spend with the students. Also allowing the instructors to be more productive and measuring how the class is doing. The nice thing about online education, I think, is that we can collect reams of data and really measure how effective and how well education is being consumed by the students. But there almost is so much data that a single instructor cannot look at it all. So this is where we're trying to use AI and machine learning techniques to alert the professor, alert the instructor on what is working and where the learning breakdowns are happening. So we do try to focus very much on what tools and abilities will make the instructor's life easier.
Great, that's terrific. Kim, you have, as you said, been very focused on designing a lot of these courses and been working with students. So we've now heard that obviously we can exacerbate inequalities with tools that are really not supportive of students, particularly students who come in with less academic support. We've heard that there can be a lot of data. What are you finding are ways that we can really try to improve that connection between the instructors, which, as Jim said, are really, really an important part of this equation, and the students?
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. Through design, I think that we can approach this through a variety of different pedagogies and activities and technologies, just like all of my colleagues are saying here. I know for me personally, I rely on a number of different frameworks, but one of the significant ones, particularly in the online environment, is the Community of Inquiry, which is by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer. And this looks at presence, but it looks at the intersection of teaching, cognitive, and then social presence. So I have a couple examples to kind of dig into that just a little bit. So first, when we're thinking about pedagogies, this really is a lot about the teaching presence and what kinds of things that instructors can do to develop that empathy and those human connections. And I think the big piece, the big grounding is really about being authentic. So it's that realness. It's like bringing that real human out from, behind the technology. So one way instructors can do this is just, simply creating welcome videos where they tell their story of who they are. And, I have a colleague who tells in her welcome video, she talks about her experience as an undergrad student and how that sort of has shaped her pathway to where she is today. And I think that that's one sort of point where her students who are undergrads can connect with her. It's like there's that similar context. But there's other things like, sort of the touch points or the interactions that instructors have with students. And I'll just speak from my own experience. I'm an fully online doctoral student right now at Indiana U. And one of the things I've experienced in my online classes that's been really humanizing, if you will, is I get video and audio feedback from my instructors. And I feel like the first time I had this from an instructor, I felt like I could hear his voice, I could see him, and I felt like he had an investment, a true investment in my success and my growth. And I could feel that. He was talking to me, it wasn't a conversation, but he was talking to me through this video, and it made a huge impact on me. And so those are just a couple examples. But I'll also say that we do this in design, we do this humanizing through the way that we design our social learning activities where students have an opportunity for that social and cognitive piece in their collaboration with others. And so when we design an activity where they can advance the course learning outcomes by bringing students together in engaging in ways where it's around a shared purpose. So, go ahead. Were you gonna?
That's a great starting point. First, one of the folks online, Autumn, asked, would you just repeat the name of the framework that you were describing before?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. It's the community of inquiry. Mm-hmm. If you Google that, I think it's Abaska University that actually has a lot of information on that. It goes into a little bit more in depth, obviously, than I went into, but it really is about the presence.
Great. So I think what you're saying is we're talking about fostering a sense of belonging. And I'd love to hear from all of you, fostering a sense of belonging. How, number one, maybe Dee, you could sort of address that from a research point of view. Is this really something that is making a significant difference? And then number two, maybe Mark, Jim, would love to also hear about, is there a role for data in that? Or is it really very much along the lines of, hey, we need to be in small groups, and then Kim kind of talk a little bit about the design. So fostering a sense of belonging. What do we know about how important this is? And then what are the ways that we can do it?
Thank you, Betsy. So I would like to start with the theoretical perspective. So a number of online theorists have been trying to answer the question, why do students struggle in the online course? And why is online learning particularly challenging to a certain group of students, like URM students? So the educational psychology literature indicates that the student-centered online learning usually requires students to assume a lot of self-autonomy. But this type of skill is not present or very strong among all the students. So on one hand, the students assume greater responsibility to engage in the learning process relative to the traditional learning context. On the other hand, the effectiveness of facilitating students or scaffolding student skills or self-learning skills relies heavily on how the course is structured and how the instructor is facilitating this process, as well as engaging their students during the online course. When this element is absent from the online course, students will feel that they are not supported, they would feel lonely, and they will feel disconnected, and therefore losing a lot of motivation. So this is from the theoretical perspective. And also empirically, there has been some research by interviewing students and interviewing online instructors about their online experiences. So I myself have been participating in some research interviewing students who have dropped from online courses offered at community colleges. So when we were asking them, what is the major problem and why did you decide to drop out of the course? Students mentioned that throughout the course, they felt they're just learning on their own. They don't see their instructor. They don't see this natural personal connection with their instructor. And for some of the courses, when there is no structurally built element to facilitate human interaction, they don't even see the instructor's image. So it's just a bunch of slides that make them feel that no one is there to care about their study. No one cares about their progress. So whenever they encounter some problems, they usually choose the easy way, that is to drop out of the course.
That's fabulous. You know, Jim and Mark, you talked about sort of data, and data can give the instructors a tremendous amount of information. Talk a little bit about what you've learned, kind of keying off of what Dee just said, which is, are you finding the same things that she's talking about in the theoretical research? Are you finding that there are changes that need to be made to the tools, to the way the courses are structured themselves, that really use the data to kind of help foster that connectiveness between the instructors and the students?
Well, I definitely wanted to echo what both Kim and Dee said, that we have found, we've worked with instructors all over the world, that the ones who seem to really care about their students are the courses that do better. And I think that connection between instructor and student is critical. And what I think the tools can do, because the instructor has a large workload, there's many students at different levels in his courses, I think what the tools can do is alert the instructor. It looks at the data and can actually reach out to him so that he knows who he needs to connect to, and he has a full understanding of where that student is. In a face-to-face environment, you can look at the eyes of the student and understand whether they, or see if they have understanding or not. On an online situation, you can't do that. I think data has to be the replacement for that type of understanding. And I think systems can provide the data and the cues to the instructors that these students are not understanding, something is not working. And then the instructor can use that to facilitate a better connection with those students, and it will lead to the student feeling that someone truly cares about their progress in the course. And I think in a nutshell, that might be the most critical point we've seen.
Great. Mark, what's been your experience? And you should also add in a little bit of the kind of instruction you guys are doing, because there's a lot that's very, very physical about what you're doing as well.
Yeah, and just I certainly agree with both of these points from Dee and Jim. And one of the things that I reflect on is that when I'm teaching in a face-to-face class, it's actually, I'm using a lot of data. When I'm asking questions to my class and I look around the room and I'm surveying them to check understanding, I'm interpreting that data on the fly, and I'm altering my instruction to suit the data that I'm observing directly in front of me with the yeses and nos from students. You know, I actually had a face-to-face class just this morning, and I was putting a question on the board, and I found out that there was something that came up last week that there clearly wasn't very good understanding on. So I was having to go back and sort of reteach that and scaffold all over again. And an online class is really what you're attempting to do, is use data in the same way by analyzing your students, by really trying to find better ways to differentiate your instruction so that you can push the students who are excelling even harder, and you can, you know, help better catch up the students that are perhaps struggling with a certain topic. And so to me, data is by far the most widely used resource in order to differentiate instruction, whether it's face-to-face or online. But yeah, definitely to talk more about what Jim said, the data does also give that opportunity to almost reward a student and to say to a student, even though I'm looking at numbers, those numbers are attached to a person, and I care about this person, and it becomes clear to the students that somebody is looking out for me, and somebody notices that I'm 2 weeks behind in my subject material, and they're sending me notifications to say, you know, I got to catch up or I'm going to fall really far behind.
Great.
And I would maybe add another good use of the data is just that you can have an adaptive course progression for each individual student. And by looking at the data and how they've done, whether they've been successful, each student can go through a very student-centric adaptive course progression, and it may be very different for different segments of the class. I think that's another alternative use of the data that you can collect as students are moving through the course.
Right, which brings up a really interesting point, and Kim, I'd love to have you reflect. So we can think of the data as obviously providing a tremendous amount of information about how the students are doing, what about how do we try to build these tools in a way that students can really bring their unique experiences, who they are, how do they become invested in the same way? I mean, your point about professors should be giving, or teachers should be giving, a video introduction so that the students know who they are. What about the other way? What are you seeing about how the students can become more invested as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And of course, there's a variety of ways to get at that. But I think, building on what you were saying is I think it's also, the instructor really about discovering who the learners are. So they're learning who each other are as well. But this is really essential in not just reaching them, but also if you're thinking about them as humans and then connecting that cognitive piece, I think it's really essential. So an example, is in designing an activity where there's that social piece and there's also, that cognitive level. One example might be I teach a blended, which is sort of the beauty maybe somewhere mixed between the online and the face-to-face course, and it's first year freshmen. And humanizing becomes this really critical piece because these are students that are transitioning from high school. Some of them are moving far away from home and so on. And so in the first week of class, my students participate in an online asynchronous activity where they share the story of their name. And I use VoiceThread technology. It could be used, probably other technologies could facilitate it as well. But students have choice, either using video or audio, to sort of dig in and sort of discover a little bit about either the background, where they got their name, what it means. They can kind of take whatever sort of approach they want to do it. But I also participate in that. So I share the story of my own name. I get to learn about them. They're learning about each other. And then I also think it's a really important and early opportunity where each student individually gets to bring sort of their unique backgrounds and their unique experiences and celebrate and acknowledge that. Because I think that's one of the pieces when we look at, like what Dee was referring to earlier about this sort of equity or inequity, particularly in online environments with minoritized students. I think that this is an opportunity that has been really just an example of what that might look like.
That's great. I love that example. And again, I'd love for you all to try to, I think people are hungry for examples like that of particular strategies, techniques, ways that people are doing it. Matthew Bresler, who's on the community here, has said, can we talk a little bit about what it means to humanize online learning in an asynchronous mode? And he says, particularly, microlearning for flipped classroom models. Wow, okay, so we're getting a little specific, but what does it really mean when we've got asynchronous learners? They're maybe not able to engage as immediately, and we're trying to get them to learn some of this stuff on their own. What strategies have you seen, have you researched, have you heard about that actually kind of support this kind of work? Dee, you're nodding, so I'm going to go to you.
Sure. I think actually Tim, Mark, and Jim have already provided some great examples about how instructors can humanize the course by actively connect with the students. Okay. And actually, I saw a previous question from the chat board. One question was about what specific data the instructors could collect from online course and then use for the students, and what are some indicators that we should look for in addition to performance. So actually there has been a lot of research trying to build models to predict the student persistence and performance. And some of the early indicators of course withdrawal include procrastination. Right before the assignments, students started logging into the course and do a lot of spend a lot of time in the course right before one day or a couple of hours before the assignment due. And the late submission of the assignment is a very strong predictor of later course withdrawal. So the online learning tools provide this information in a timely manner for instructor to monitor the progress of the students. And then it's really up to the instructor to how to connect with the students. So one example could be the instructor could send personalized emails to students who have been procrastinating or who didn't submit the assignments in time or were past due, right? So then this is not just monitor the students, but also send a very strong signal to the students that the instructor really care. The instructor really care about the students' progress and really want to help.
And is that the difference between personalizing? Someone asked this question online. Is that the difference between personalizing and humanizing? I mean, is there personalizing, is it that element of caring that kind of makes the difference between those?
Are definitely closely connected with each other. So when you are trying to humanizing a course, you try to respect each person as an individual. So the personalization definitely will enter this concept of humanizing a course. It's really hard to avoid personalizing this process when you are trying to humanizing a course, especially in the online environments when students are relatively learning independently on their own.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you, the other folks. Jim, do you see a difference between personalizing, humanizing? Are those part and parcel of something?
I see humanizing as that connection to the instructor and also to the other classmates. I think that's very important too.
That's a great point.
Now, asynchronous is important though, that, you know, students by and large we find are willing consumers of this. They love doing assignments and homework at 2 in the morning from the dorm room. So they're not resisting at all. But I think, especially in STEM subjects, but I think in all subjects, that ability of doing the assignment or doing practice questions without judgment and getting that instant feedback. I mean, I think it's been shown in most peer-reviewed research that if you can instantly get feedback on how you've done in a course, that's critically important to the learning process. And I think that's key to that asynchronous learning, that every student is doing the assignment at a different time. And I'll just add one more thing, and because it moves into that working as a group. In Denmark, we work with DTU, and they have structured their online courses so that students have to work in groups from the very beginning. So most assignments are turned in groups, even though they're all online. They have a team that they're working on it, and they're being taught the same subject or the same concepts, but they just simply randomize the questions for each student. So it means that the student can't just copy, you know, or the strongest can't just, you know, give it to the other members, but they learn in a group environment. I think that's also important to foster this. You're not by yourself. You're actually in a class. You have other students who you can talk to. And I think online tools can help foster that type of environment.
And let's talk about some of those strategies for re-engaging students who are falling behind. Allie online has asked that question, and it's a really good one. So we've heard about a couple. You can certainly send them emails, you can send them reminders, but to Jim's point, how do you also, are there techniques for engaging the rest of the community and getting other students to help re-engage students, or what else? Kim, Mark, have you guys employed? What other strategies have you employed for re-engaging people who've fallen behind?
You know, one thing I've recently done is utilize discussion forums in a way where I've actually told students outright and said to them, post the questions that you'd like to see on your next exam in the discussion forum.
Nice.
Especially as a STEM educator, primarily a math educator, it kind of boggles my mind sometimes when I ask a question and I get atrocious results from the question, and perhaps it's a misworded question, perhaps it's my own doing. I'll ask a colleague and say, "What do you think of this question?" They say, "I can't believe your class struggled with this." How? And we all say the same thing. How did they not know this was going to be on the test? So sometimes I have created engagement by telling my students, post questions that you'd like to see on your test in the discussion forum and respond to one another's questions. And it creates a very interesting dynamic because students that are struggling with a certain topic might post something that's quote unquote easier, and students that are excelling might actually post something significantly difficult, just because it's a competitive academic process. And I find that gets everybody out of their seats and at least starts the communication among students.
Nice. Kim, what about other strategies you've employed?
Yeah, and I mean, this is just one, and it's something that I've used in my own teaching, but also in designing and working with colleagues. And I think this was noted in the chat recently about that there's challenges around group or teamwork. So I realize all of that. But I think one of the biggest pieces in my work is really setting the foundation for what that means and what that in terms of having the teams or groups come together and whether it's a team contract or whether it's some sort of plan of how they're going to sort of negotiate and facilitate their work together. There has to be some instructor sort of oversight, if you will, but it's really about giving the autonomy. And I think what that does, and what I've seen in my experience in working with others, is that that can be a place, particularly in the online environment, where students have some accountability to their team members. So that can be a motivating factor as well. Now, I'm not saying it works in all contexts, but I've seen it, when we set the framework and set the stage and what those expectations are of being part of a team, and that, then they use sort of, I'm looking at it more from, instead of this individualistic sort of approach, but it's more about the collective, like we're all doing this together. So I think that that's an opportunity as well.
Let's take a couple of minutes and talk about how you can prepare instructors for this. I mean, Jim, I love the point that you made earlier, which is, we're really talking about three different groups of people: the people who build the curriculum, people who are taking the curriculum, the students, and then the instructors. And the instructors are obviously kind of this critical focal point. We don't talk enough, I think, about how to prepare instructors, particularly in this world in which we're asking a lot. I mean, Mark, you made the point that these courses take more work, not less work. And we're talking about humanizing, not just sending them an email once in a while, but trying to really engage authentically. So talk a little bit, and maybe Dee, you could, again, I love starting with the research base. What are you seeing about the difference in the scaffolding and the preparation for the instructors in dealing and handling online classes, big or small?
I think this is a great point. So I think we have been talking about the importance of the instructors, but in order to provide humanized instruction, the instructors need to receive professional development opportunities in terms of how to develop really strong interactive online courses. In addition, to offer courses like that, it requires a lot of institutional support because it's a big investment from the instructor in terms of time, in terms of efforts. And there are sometimes certain resources would need the institutional support. For example, if the students need online tutorials or other types of guidance, the instructor alone could not make that happen. So I would say institutional support is critical in making this humanizing, the concept of humanize necessary. So this is a necessary component.
Institutional support, it's a great point. Mark, tell us what is institutional support? What does that look like for you guys in Alberta?
For us, I think institutional support looks like a lot of back and forth between the subject matter expert and perhaps some programmers, some instructional designers, some ed tech specialists, and back and forth in the sense that everybody's going to have to learn a little bit, right? The subject matter experts are going to have to learn a little bit about the tools and the technologies that are available, and the people that know the technology the best are going to need to learn a little bit about the subject matter. And a lot of times there's unrealistic expectations, if you would, on both sides. So for us, institutional support is really just providing a front end for subject matter experts or instructors to go to. They can say, we want to find the way to bring this subject online. We got to bring this topic online. And perhaps they don't know of technologies that are pre-existing or available. So we research them, or perhaps it's a ground up, we build it approach. And we have had to do that and build something brand new from scratch.
Yeah.
I would say, if I could just add, this is such a critical point. We deal with institutions. Some of them have a team of 100 people supporting. Other times it's simply the instructor developing the material by himself and then delivering it. It basically, writing a textbook is an extremely hard thing to do, but it's one-dimensional. It's you start at the top and you work to the bottom. Developing online materials, which are interactive, they have animations, they're very graphical, they have questions spread out through the materials, they can adapt to how the student answers the question. I think people have to realize developing good online content that can be easily used by an instructor is extremely hard to do. And we're just at the beginning stages of that. So I think this concept of institutional support is critical. And I get upset when I hear some institutions thinking that they're going to save money by going to an online environment. It's almost, at this stage, it's the opposite. It's like rewriting every textbook you had, but adding in animations and graphics and dynamic questions. It's, yeah, the support is critical.
And there's a series of conversations going on in the chat that are pretty fascinating. Cynthia and other folks have been asking things like, you know, do you need to, and Cynthia, you should jump in if I'm misinterpreting your comments here, but, you know, can we create interdisciplinary communities outside of the classroom? That, I assume that question means both for supporting students, but maybe also for supporting instructors. Kim, have you seen that happen?
Yeah, actually I have. And it's interesting because back a little further in the chat related to that, somebody posed a question around, you know, what have we seen in terms of faculty or instructors participating in professional development, online professional development, and how does that influence then becoming an online instructor? So really like learning in the mode that you're actually going to be teaching in. And I'll just say we have a pretty robust program on our campus. And also, I facilitate some of the online certification courses, they call them, at our chancellor's office. And one of the things we've seen, and in our data, sort of in terms of like perception of folks that have participated, is that there's this one big, huge takeaway. It's like their aha moment. And I hear this over and over and over again. And that is, oh, now I know what it feels like to be an online student. I had no idea. And these are sometimes folks that have already been teaching online for quite some time. And I literally could quote that because almost, you know, every single time there's folks, a significant amount of them that report that. And so I think that there's a variety of ways to do this, but I will also echo my colleagues in saying that having the institutional commitment and the vision behind what that looks like is critical. I mean, that's kind of the way we make these things shift.
Sounds like it should be almost required that you are participating in an online community with some kind of, you know, real commitment there before you kind of go down the path of teaching some of these online courses. Another question that came up was, and it's an interesting question. It was framed as how much humanizing time per student per week is recommended? That's such a hard question. It's kind of like saying, so how often should I tell my husband I love him, right? I mean, I don't know how you can quite answer that question, but.
And it depends on the husband.
But talk a little bit about, maybe the way to think about this is we think about how much time we spend preparing you know, exams or the curriculum. How top of mind does it absolutely need to be that we are really trying to engage with students in these online environments? Anybody jump in?
So I would say, I would think it's a hard one to put a metric on two base from a perspective that you'll personalize and humanize in very direct ways, sometimes engaging students through forums or synchronous means such as Zoom or WebEx or whatever it happens to be. You might be able to put numbers on that in the sense of office hours or one-to-one time with students, but the real nuts and bolts that we're finding on online education is personalizing through differentiating resources, which is so difficult to put time on and almost impossible to put a metric to. So for example, it's no different than when you're teaching face-to-face in class and the student asks, you ask the class a question and the student responds, you really don't know how much time you're going to invest into possibly correcting misconceptions on behalf of your students in a live environment. And in an online environment, you have to almost do the same thing, go through the same iterative process where it's binary yes or no, but you have to account for a lot of unknown in the sense of what kind of response you're going to get. So when you're building an online course and even facilitating an online course, attaching hours to it is darn near impossible when you're thinking about differentiating through adaptation or adaptive learning. So I would say that's a real tough one to put a number on. I would hope that we would think that it's going to be 2 to 3 times at least the time that it would take to facilitate the same class face-to-face, in my opinion anyway.
Right.
I'll just add on that if you don't mind, Betsy, but it's just real brief. But I think what I'm thinking about, and I agree with you, is that when we're talking about authenticity and about being authentic, like how do you measure caring? How do you measure what's enough and what's not enough? So I think it's really, it depends. That's my answer.
Yeah. I think it does.
Yeah, so since we are on this topic about like how much, can I also add some points? So I recently conducted a research collaboration a number of community colleges in North Carolina. So we sent surveys to online instructors and students to talk about what they like most when they are either teaching or taking an online course. What are the strategies that make online learning much more effective? And there are 5 broad themes that have been that have emerged from students' responses and also instructors' responses. The first one is to provide a clear instruction on course content and course requirements. So I would say this one probably would be commonly shared between online versus face-to-face courses. The second one is respond to students' questions and their posts in discussion forum in a timely manner. So this has been emphasized by many students. And for online students, they typically expect the instructors to turn around in a even faster manner because they really rely on those quick responses to move on and work on their assignments individually. And some students complain that when instructors create a discussion forum without responding to students' posts or questions, it's really frustrating because they feel this is the efforts. They are required to make efforts while the instructor do not pay any attention. But this one could require a lot of time and efforts from the online instructor. The third one is to provide feedback and reach out to students to keep them on track. Care. So students really value that when they are lagging behind, the instructor could monitor their progress, identify the problem, reach out to them through personalized emails, and provide personalized feedback about what are the things I need to work on, what are the resources I can have access to, and what should I do in order to catch up. The fourth one is to give checklists, examples, and a grading rubric to help students understand what needs to be done. And online students in particular, they really value clear grading rubric and requirements from the instructor. But this again would require the instructor to put a lot of time and efforts in clarify what is the rubric, the grading rubric, what is expected from each assignment. And then lastly, send students weekly announcements to give students guidance and create teacher presence. So that the students really emphasized they need to sense clearly a teacher presence on a regular basis. So through the personalized email, through the weekly announcements, they would feel the instructor is there caring about their progress. So I would say it indeed requires a lot of time from the instructor. I agree with all of you that it's really hard to put it in a numeric value, but in general, when we were interviewing instructors, when the instructor is teaching both online and face-to-face, they spend more time when they are trying to deliver a really high quality interactive online course.
Right. We've got only a few more minutes here, and we do want to share the word cloud that you all contributed to in the early part of this. So my colleagues are going to share this now. This is the collection of thoughts that you guys offered. That's beautiful. It looks like clearly flexibility, potential, convenience, possibilities, all these things are really strong, but we're also seeing complicated, detachment, and some things ubiquitous. So some really interesting words. One question that I quite frankly am wondering myself is, are there any tools that actually are helping the instructors monitor how they are responding to student queries and work and so forth. So for instance, Jim, you talked about how we can collect a huge amount of data on how the students are doing, and we can use adaptive technologies to really sort of identify who needs what. I'm wondering whether we're seeing the evolution of any tools that actually support that from the instructor's point of view, because as Dee has described and what you've all described are a huge number of new requirements for the instructors. How frequently are you responding? How are you interacting? And I'm just interested in what tools there are to support this from the instructor's point of view. Have you seen that evolve at all?
Well, it's true that, at this stage, we are providing data to the instructors, and we're providing cues that, these people should be communicated with. But you're right that you don't get what you expect, you get what you measure, and providing a feedback loop to how well that works. The only caution I would say, we've looked at large student populations, and students are very different. Like the amount of time that we had the time discussion. Well, students spend massively different amounts of time on a course, and it doesn't correlate that well with their final marks. So each student needs something different as well. So it just would make these tools a bit more complicated to close that loop. I think it would be a very good thing to do. I'm just not sure how you would do it today.
I was going to quickly comment on instructional efficiencies, because we have had a lot of conversation about improving student experience, and a lot of time focused on how much time these resources take to build. And one thing that our institution focuses on also is how easy it is and how much of a propensity there is to be able to share resources amongst instructors that are teaching certain courses. We do find there's a great deal of overlap occasionally between courses and even between subject matters. And using tools that don't allow us to share very easily is really just creating sort of a very closed environment where it always feels like an uphill battle. And our institution has recently adopted some tools that allow us to really easily share, not just amongst our own faculty, but also with other institutions. And I think that's a really critical aspect here is network and share with other institutions that are trying to accomplish the same goals.
Are there any particular tools, Mark, that you can point to like that?
I mean, honestly, the probably the best one we've seen is really Mobius, which is a tool brought forward by DigitalEd. It allows the instructors the options to share between courses. It allows them to share amongst other faculty and across our institution, even though our campuses are divided in 3 geographic locations. And it allows us to even go to the next level and share with other institutions across the world. And Fantastic. It has really helped us with a give and take of resources.
So we've seen a lot of really interesting suggestions in the chat line. My team is going to compile some of the resources that you guys have been talking about and sharing there. As we wrap up here, I'd like to hear one, again, sort of tip or strategy from each of you, something that you have found that has really made a difference as we think about this enormous task of really humanizing, of really making an authentic connection between instructors and students in online environments. We obviously haven't had much of a chance to talk about the difference between small groups and very, very large groups. So if you can offer us a thought, do let us know whether you're thinking that this is kind of, what size group do you think that this strategy is most useful to? And I'd love to just get one observation from each of you as we wrap up here.
I can start if you want. I feel that what is key here is going to be the measurement of the students, but also how the instructor is interacting with the students. I think we have the ability of measuring much more within the educational process than we had even a few years ago. So I think that measurement will be key, and sort of what you measure is what tends to improve. So I think it'll be an iterative process, but I would say that measurement of the educational process is key to the future.
Right.
For us, I'd say one of the biggest things is try to create a culture of innovation within your institution. A culture that everybody's buying into, hopefully, and they're all being equitable in terms of how humanistic they're being with their students, and they're collaborating. They're talking about what's working, what's not working.
I'll go a little more like specific. Just another example. I love to share examples with people and also hear other people's examples of how they've created different things in the online environment. And I worked with an instructor a few years ago who really wanted to create, again, that sense of belonging, but it was a sort of a culminating piece in her course. And she wanted to sort of get whatever it is that we get when we go to a face-to-face conference. She wanted students to be able to get that networking, that connection, those sharing of resources and sharing of ideas, but in the online environment, asynchronous. And so she created a whole, and I worked with her on this, created a whole design and activity around a virtual conference. And it was really amazing. We used a number of different technologies, which, you know, some of those are still around, but the idea was really about students sharing the work that they've been doing, the learning that they've been sort of gathering throughout that learning experience, and then sharing them more broadly. It was like they were presenting at a conference, and that's how they felt. And so I think, again, it's about bringing these, real peer-to-peer, real-world interactions is really important for their success.
Great. Dee, last thought?
I feel like based on all those research and hearing people's thoughts on this, I think the most critical component is institutional support and culture, to have a community that supports both online instructors and online students. This would involve providing professional development opportunities to instructors, providing direct support for instructors who like to translate online face-to-face materials to create an effective online course, and ongoing support while the instructor is delivering the course content to prepare the instructors in a feasible way and a practical way to deliver and use the tools that we know and think would be beneficial to the students.
Fantastic. In some ways, it's really about improving all of the teaching practices. We have once thought of higher education as the place where people who loved the topic went because they were interested in pursuing the topic. And yet this is really so much more so about building the relationships between the instructors and the students and really bringing out the best teaching capabilities. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this panel. We have compiled, and we will send you all a list of the resources that we've been talking about on this webinar, as well as a link to this webinar. And we at EdSurge would love to hear from you too. Send us a note. Let us know what kinds of topics you'd like to see in future webinars. I'd like to offer again a huge round of thanks to our webinar participants for their time and their insights. Jim Cooper, Kim Vincent-Layton, Mark Schneider, and Dee Shu. Really appreciate all of that. And of course, a very special thanks to DigitalEd for their sponsorship of this webinar. DigitalEd, again, provides a suite of tools to support and enhance education, particularly in science, technology, engineering, and math. And you can check those out at digitaled.com. Once again, I'm Betsy Corcoran, CEO and co-founder of EdSurge, and you can find more on ideas in education and the future of learning at our site, which is edsurge.com. And also check out some of our free newsletters and other resources. Again, thank you so much for your time, and have a very human day. Enjoy it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.